it reached a point where if as a minister, you're not just exposing or resisting what he was doing, if you are not complying with the requests of the Gupta family, you would be fired in the middle of the night. And we have many experiences. Minister Ntantla Nene, as an example, was made the Minister of Finance. When he refused to actually sign a deal with the Guptas, he was then removed immediately and replaced by a very junior person as a Minister of Finance. So Zuma's power at the time was so huge, but the NEC failed the party. They failed the country because they then did not take action to stop him in his tracks from allowing the Guptas to actually take over of all the levers of the state.
Good morning. My name is Selebi. I'm talking to you all the way from far away, from South Africa for a change. And welcome to WorldView, the #1 media company where we explore everyone's perspective in order to broaden our own perspectives on things. It never stops. This morning, I'm really excited to have Themba Maseko in this conversation. It's really hard to decide where to start a conversation with Themba Maseko. He's a man I've watched since I was literally in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and I've really had much admiration for him. Even more in recent years when he stood up against his own political home and said, wait a minute, this is not for the South Africa that we signed up for. So Themba, welcome.
No, thank you, Soli. It's my pleasure to you.
Many people will remember you for being the former spokesperson for government, obviously CEO of the GCIS, Government Communications and Information Systems. You've also been a superintendent of the education department in Gauteng. Superintendent sounds a bit military. Do they still have superintendents overlooking departments?
Unfortunately, they still have the same title. Yeah.
Wow, it's a really, it's quite a term. But Themba, let's start maybe a little bit with your journey, where you started. I know that it's a very long journey, but basically, how you got to where you are at now, politically speaking, in terms of South Africa. Have your views of the country changed over time?
Well, I mean, my involvement in politics started off when I was a kid in Soweto, when the apartheid government introduced Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. And we decided to protest. And at that stage, I did not consider myself as an activist. I was just a kid, 12 years old in Soweto, opposing the policy of being instructed in a language which I considered foreign at the time. And after that, I went to university. I became involved in student politics, and student politics put me into the mainstream of politics. And I ended up getting involved in underground activities of the ANC and the South African Communist Party, I might add. And that led me to being elected as a member of parliament. After spending a year in parliament, I got bored. I just thought I was too young to be an MP. So I decided to join the public service. And that's when I was appointed as the first head of the Gauteng Department of Education. And my job was essentially to set up that department, which was about amalgamating 4 racially divided departments and constituting a single non-racial, non-sexist education department. And so that's how my career in the public service started. I ended up in national government working as Director General of the Public Service of the Public Works Department. And that's what led me to be the government spokesperson and CEO of GCIS. And that's how everything actually started blowing up.
But a lot of things happened since then, Themba, and for what we didn't mention about your history, which of course is very long, is when I first got to know you, you were at Wits. I was a student at Wits. You were my senior there, and you're one of the movers and shakers, for change. And I used to be one of those admiring the speeches and like speaking truth to power. So you started this long before I even I learned how to raise my voice against authorities. But do you feel disappointed by the ANC today, or do you think there's hope over the past few years since Zuma left?
A lot of people of my generation, activists of my generation, who started getting involved in the anti-apartheid movement, we had very high hopes that our liberation movement, the ANC, was going to take over and change the lives of ordinary people.
Right.
But what we saw 10 years into democracy, we started realizing a change, a culture change in the movement when people in government started putting their personal interests ahead of the interests of the country. And that's when the element of corruption started setting in. And we saw people that we had admired as young stars, as young activists, becoming embroiled in corrupt activities as they partnered with corrupt elements in the private sector with a view to stealing money from the public coffers.
Right.
And that led to the many fights that took place within the party itself. And as we speak today, the party is divided in the middle along factional lines among those who want to loot from the public coffers, and a smaller but very good number of people who say they are opposed to corruption and they are still committed to the vision of the party. But as we sit here, many of us, me included, are extremely disappointed about the turn of events. The ANC seems to have suffered from what many liberation movements have endured, which is as soon as they get into power, the interests of the people become second. Their individual interests actually take priority, and that's when state coffers are being looted in all spheres of government. And to that extent, I must say, there's a big part of me that is very disappointed with the turn of events in the country.
Right. But Themba, you mentioned people we used to respect, people we all used to respect. I want to ask you specific questions about former President Thabo Mbeki, because he is the one who first interfered with the justice system when he tried to stop a very respected NDPP, National Director of Public Prosecutions, from instituting an arrest against a corrupt and captured police commissioner at the time, Ajay Selebi. Surely that's when the wheels began to fall off a little bit, when he did that interference, because then after that, Motlanthe came, and people don't forget, many people don't seem to know that Motlanthe came and tried to get Pikoli to agree to some conditions, maybe principally not to go after Jacob Zuma, who was going to become president. And then when Pikoli refused, he basically threw him under the bus, and he got fired, and everything started. The Scorpions was taken off under Motlanthe. So if you talk about the characters of Mbeki and Motlanthe in this unraveling of law in South Africa, I mean, what is your view? I mean, do you have any perspective on that?
Look, on the Pikoli matter was something that was of great concern to me, especially the way it was managed. And I'll say, as a government spokesperson, I found myself right in the middle of the storm, because when the decision was made to suspend him, I was called to actually make an announcement that he had been suspended. President Mbeki, somebody I still respect to this day, told me in the meeting I had with him when he called me to make the announcement that he did not necessarily want to stop the prosecution of the arrest and prosecution of the then Jackie Selebi, the National Commissioner of Police. He said his concern was the fact that Pikoli wanted to move very quickly without paying due attention to security considerations. I mean, he put it bluntly and said, listen, I mean, the country could not wake up one morning and find that the police commissioner had been arrested. He had feared that, in fact, if the Scorpions at the time had arrived at the headquarters of the police to arrest the police commissioner, that could have created quite a scene, a security scene, where the police would come up with guns and try to defend their own commissioner. So he wanted the matter to be managed properly. So he wanted the Pikoli to delay the arrest and prosecution until such time that the ground is laid properly for that arrest to be made. So that's how he explained it to me. And I still had concerns about the fact that, in fact, there needed to be a proper process before the national director of public prosecutions was suspended. But clearly, Mbeki and the Minister Babandla, had their own view about how they wanted to handle the matter. But
well, that's an interesting perspective from Mbeki. But I mean, if you read the fired NDPP's perspective in his book, he says he tried many times to get the president to understand that something is happening, and in his position he couldn't sit down and sit back and do nothing. And the president kept saying, wait, until the point where he said, look, I can't wait anymore. I have to arrest this man because he's continuing to do the same things I told the president about. And nothing in the law apparently forces him to consult the president. It was just as a matter of courtesy that he went to the president. Surely the president was defending this man. Pikoli, I mean, he was defending the commissioner of police.
There were very strong perceptions at the time because it was common cause, well known in the country, that in fact, President Mbeki had a very close relationship with the police commissioner at the time.
Right.
So there were perceptions that he was out to defend him. But in my conversation with Mbeki, he's made it very clear to me that in fact, there was no intention on his part to defend or protect, but
Right.
he just wanted the situation to be managed properly in such a way that it doesn't lead to an ugly security situation. But yes, the way it was done, there was no requirement on Pikoli to consult the president in particular, but there was some requirement that Pikoli had to have some discussions with his minister, the Minister of Justice, to say, this is what we're trying to do. But what it turned out was that Mbeki informed me was that the relationship between the two of them, the minister and Pikoli, had broken down to such a point that they could not have any discussions. So the reasons given to me as a person who was supposed to announce the decision was that the relationship between the minister and Pikoli had broken down, and he wanted to avoid an ugly security situation. So that's the narrative I was given.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I think the public perceptions out there was strongly that Mbeki wanted to protect Jackie Selebi.
Right. Well, I'm sure that Mbeki didn't see what was coming after that. He was taken out of power. And so what do you think of the role that Motlanthe played in all of that, in the interim between the time when Mbeki was taken out of the office to Zuma becoming president?
Well, look, Motlanthe, a gentleman, a true Democrat in my view, had no choice. The suspension had already been announced. A commission of inquiry had been already set in motion, which was chaired by, I think, the former Speaker of Parliament. So Motlanthe had no choice but to proceed with the process that was already laid out for him by President Mbeki. So he had really no choice but to act based on the recommendations that came from the commission. But I think that Motlanthe did his very best to make sure that at least there's compliance with the Constitution and the law. But at the end of the day, he had no choice. He had to implement the recommendations of the Ginola Commission.
But do you really believe that Pikoli is lying when he says that Motlanthe tried to get him to agree that he would be reinstated if he would not go after the old man, Zuma? And when he said, no, I have to act without fear, prejudice, and bias, or etc., favor, then Motlanthe said, well, I have to fire you. Is Pikoli lying?
I have great respect for him. I think for Pikoli, I think he's a man of absolute integrity.
Right.
I've got no business to second guess him, but I think that he wanted to do his job the best way he understood it had to be done. And I think that he needs to be given credit for wanting to implement the law as head of public prosecutions. And for that, I think the country will forever be indebted to him, because when the time had come for the country to see some senior government officials and senior politicians being prosecuted for wrongdoing. So for a public protector with such conviction and commitment, I think that I still have great respect for him. Whether he was lying or not, I've got no reason to question him whether he was lying or not. That's how he experienced the events.
Okay, well, Motlanthe also oversaw the undoing of the Scorpions. I mean, even given the political context at the time, do you think in hindsight it was the right thing? If you were Motlanthe at the time, would you have undone the Scorpions?
Well, the problem, if I was him, I would have been in a difficult spot equally, because the damage was done at the Polokwane ANC conference, where a resolution was actually taken that the Scorpions should be disbanded. And as president of the party, and he literally had no choice but to implement that resolution of the conference. And in the book, I mentioned that, in fact, of all the resolutions taken at that ANC conference, that one was the only one that was implemented with absolute commitment and certainty. And within months, it was implemented, and the Scorpions were actually disbanded. So I think that was a very unfortunate and a bad turning point for justice in this country. It was a wrong decision at the ANC conference. Motlanthe had no choice but to implement that decision.
But we always have a choice, Themba. You had to choose also in your position, and of course, when you decided to follow your conscience, you lost your job. We always have a choice. I'm sorry, when somebody decides that decision was, first of all, not good for the ANC, it was bad for South Africa. So there was a time in the point of South Africa's post-apartheid history when what is good for the ANC was no longer good for South Africa, and what was good for South Africa was no longer good for the ANC. And removing the Scorpions was not about South Africa, Themba. I'm sorry, it was about the ANC.
Absolutely. I think that if you look at, for example, if you compare the way the current President Ramaphosa is actually managing some of the ANC resolutions, I mean, the one that comes to mind immediately is that the Reserve Bank needs to be nationalized with immediate effect. Now, Ramaphosa gets elected and is expected to implement that resolution. He comes into government and says, listen, this is not a good decision. It needs to be reviewed. Let's pack it and let more work be done. So clearly, there is a choice. I mean, if you're in a position of leadership, you can make a decision that will make you unpopular in your party, but it will be good for the country. So in a sense, you're absolutely correct. It was possible for Motlanthe to actually decide not to implement that resolution. But at that time, he decided that, in fact, he had no choice but to implement that decision. And I think that history will actually judge both the ANC and Motlanthe himself for the decision that was taken.
Yeah, I think the example of the current president and the resolution to nationalize the Reserve Bank is a good one. I think that leadership is not a popularity contest. I'm sure you know that when you're a leader, you will have to make decisions from time to time when your own people will look at you and say no way. In the same way that when Mandela decided to go and have coffee with Betsy Verwoerd, you might recall, a lot of people were like, "Are you mad? You can't do that." But he said, "I have to do it. Let me tell you why I'm doing it." You know, so there are moments where you have to walk ahead and people have to follow you when you're a leader. Yeah,
absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, if I was Motlanthe at the time, I would have done what Ramaphosa had done, to say, guys, let's put this thing on hold. Corruption is becoming a major scourge in our society. It is not the right decision to actually disband the Scorpions, but unfortunately, that's what happened. Yeah, and Motlanthe felt it was the right decision to make.
Yeah, Themba, South Africans are always in these difficult years. We're always looking for heroes, and you became a hero when you first of all defined the Guptas. You defined Zuma. You went out and said, you know what, I'm going to tell the country what's going on. And especially given your history within the ANC, it was really bold. And to this day, I really respect you for having taken that step. What was it like when you decided, I'm going to tell the world about this, especially maybe that moment when Ajay called you when you were on your way to Sun City? How did you spend that night?
Look, the matter with Gupta and Ajay, with Gupta and Zuma, was a very difficult period in my political history and my role as a public servant, because as we said earlier on, Zuma was one of those leaders in the ANC that we had idolized as young activists. I mean, he had spent time in Robben Island, was in exile, so you almost see these as your heroes. But here he was actually making a call to me, saying I must help these Gupta brothers without telling me what kind of help they were looking for. So it turned out that the help they were looking for from me was that I must help them steal funds from the public coffers. So initially it was more about defiance. I said, this is my civic duty not to cooperate with both Zuma and the Guptas. And eventually I then became what is known as a whistleblower later on. But when that call was made, to answer your question directly, I was extremely upset. I mean, I had never in my life as a civil servant received a call from somebody who's outside of business trying to give me an instruction to actually have a meeting with him to discuss again. This was the second call where he was insisting that I must come to discuss how I was going to transfer money to his business. And I was in the car with my wife, and I decided to tell him to go, and I'm not going to use an expletive.
Right.
Yeah?
But
But at the end of that call, I mean, the evening was very a difficult one for me because I thought I was being put under severe pressure. And that call ended up with him making a threat to me to say, if I don't cooperate, he will talk to my superiors to make sure that I'm replaced as a public servant. And I was prepared to take that risk because what he was asking me to do was contrary to my principles and beliefs as both an activist and as a civil servant.
But there were already rumors, Themba, around that period that many government ministers, I don't know which ones, how many, were being summoned to the Gupta family house in Saxonwell to be given instructions, perhaps to be told how to do stuff. And some of them were appointed thanks to Gupta, endorsement. I mean, at least that's what we are told. Surely you knew that these people had that power, that kind of power, at least over the president, over the affairs of the country.
At that stage, yes, the grapevine was full of anecdotes of people who had been put under pressure by the Guptas, who were essentially using their friendship with the Zuma family to actually access government coffers. In fact, in the meeting I had with Ajay Gupta at his house in Saxonwell, he actually told me that, in fact, ministers routinely come to the house to get instructions about what needed to happen. He told me, he volunteered information to me that he met with Zuma on a weekly basis before he goes to his meetings at Luthuli House. So he told me that if I have difficulty getting money from other government departments, I must tell him, and he will summon the ministers to actually and give them the instructions to transfer the money to his company. So clearly, he was telling me that, in fact, I needed to be part of his criminal syndicate, that he had absolute power over ministers. And that's what I found totally objectionable. And yes, some ministers were already reporting in the media that, in fact, they were being told, Minister Mbalula was being told that by the Guptas that he was going to be appointed a minister and eventually became a minister of government. So clearly there was evidence that, in fact, the Guptas had absolute power over Zuma and that he was allowing them to influence decision-making in government and in state-owned enterprises. So it was something that was of extreme concern to me.
Yeah, no matter how many times I hear this, it just makes me my heart so sore when I hear that people we used to look up to turn out and allow themselves to be used against the interests of a country. So many of their comrades have given so much for. It really is painful. But Themba, let's talk about the ANC's deployment committee. Okay, I mean, I imagine there's a committee called the Deployment Committee that decides you're going to be a minister over there, or we recommend this one to become a head of ESCOM, a head of Transnet, etc., etc. Now, clearly, when the Guptas were here, that committee's powers were taken away, or at least it was headquartered at Saxonwell. Everything that should have been done by the Deployment Committee based at Luthuli House was actually done by Saxonwell. How did that happen? And why did nobody say, wait a minute, you're not doing that, we're doing this?
I think that the challenge that many of the ANC leaders experienced at the time was the power of incumbency. That is, the power of the person who's president of the ANC. There's very little or very few people who are prepared to raise their finger and challenge a sitting head of government and the president of the party. So we had a situation where Zuma, who had been elected as ANC president with a huge majority within the party structure, so he was a very powerful politician. And when he started participating and working with the with the Guptas, it was very clear that he was usurping the power of both the state and the party and locating it with the Gupta family. So a lot of the decisions, I don't think the deployment committee had a say, even before he was there, over the appointment of ministers. That was prerogative of the president. He would consult with the sitting secretary general of the party, but decisions were basically his. The deployment committee had a say over appointment of senior government officials and appointment of board members and chairpersons and CEOs of state-owned enterprises. And that's where the Guptas actually usurped his powers completely. I don't think that he even understood and knew what they were doing. They were just using him, and he allowed them to actually use this power to tell him who needs to be appointed to which board at what point. Yes, and leadership of the ANC or members of the NEC need to take full responsibility because they knew what was going on. They knew that the power of the party had been usurped, but none of them were willing to actually raise their hands and say, this is wrong, this is incorrect, and something needed to be done about it. It took too long for them to stand up and say, listen, we can't accept this anymore. When allegations of state capture were becoming too public and the ANC as a party could no longer turn a blind eye to it. And that's when they started saying, but no, we need to do something about it. But yes, during Zuma's time, the Gupta family had absolute control over him and over appointments to key positions in state-owned entities and state departments.
I mean, you mentioned what's his name again? The young man who was appointed Minister of Sports and then Police.
Mbalula.
I'm sorry, Mbalula. So when Mbalula was appointed Minister of Police, now he occupied the position that is currently occupied by Galen. He oversaw the Hawks and the South African police intelligence, all of that stuff. He was appointed at a time at the height of state capture, when even Thuli Madonsela, everybody was talking against what's going on in South Africa. But not once, not a single time did this man say, we need to go after these guys. Surely, I mean, did he not know, or was he appointed? Did he comply with his appointment and look the other way? Surely the Guptas, who still had a lot of power during the time, would not have made this man Minister of Police if they knew that one day he would knock on their doors at 3 a.m. with blue lights outside. I mean, he totally looked the other way, and nobody's talking about this. He never once said, let's stop these guys. They're hurting our country. Why?
Look, it would be unfair to single him out because all the people who were in the leadership of the ANC at the time are equally culpable. They knew what was going on. In his case, for example, when he was just about to be appointed as, I think it was Minister of Sports at the time, he was informed about that appointment by the Guptas, and then Zuma subsequently appointed him to his cabinet. He then is reported to have gone to an NEC meeting to complain. And people who had that meeting say he even was in tears when he told them that, in fact, he was informed of his appointment first by the Guptas before Zuma actually told him he was going to be appointed. But remember that when Zuma became powerful, very few people were willing to challenge him. He then went through a period where he and the Guptas identify a number of individuals who then ended up being appointed into key positions in government. For example, when the Guptas wanted to take charge of or get into mining and they started getting mining deals, they made sure that they got people, somebody like the Minister Zwane as Minister of Energy. Somebody who was not even a national figure, he was working in a province in the Free State. Zuma made that appointment, and if there was any indication that any minister was starting to raise questions about what he was doing, he did not hesitate but fire those ministers. So you recall in the book, I talk about 11 cabinet reshuffles that Zuma actually implemented. So it reached a point where if as a minister, you're not just exposing or resisting what he was doing, if you are not complying with the requests of the Gupta family, you would be fired in the middle of the night. And we have experiences many experiences. Minister Ntantla Nene, as an example, was made Minister of Finance. When he refused to actually sign a deal with the Guptas, he was then removed immediately and replaced by a very junior person as a Minister of Finance. So Zuma's power at the time was so huge, but the NEC failed the party. They failed the country because they then did not take action to stop him in his tracks from allowing the Guptas to actually take over of all the levers of the state.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the Secretary General at the time, Motlanthe, when the banks shut down the Gupta accounts. He wanted to intimidate the banks into opening those accounts when he knew that money running through those accounts was ill-gotten money from the public service purse. Why did he do that? I mean, do you think these people? Okay, and I see the point about Zuma having been a powerful president, but surely South Africa is so important. People have given so much for this country. How do you get to a point where you say, I don't want to be fired. I'm going to allow for this country, South Africa, to be betrayed because I don't want to lose a job? I mean, like, Motlanthe was prepared to get these guys' accounts to keep running. Why?
I think that history is going to judge the leadership of the NEC very harshly. Many of the characters who were in leadership positions knew what was happening. It's one thing to know and not do something about it. It's something extra wrong if you know and actively participate in facilitating what they were doing. I mean, let's take, for example, my experience with the Montashe as the Secretary General of the ANC. When I came out and exposed what the Guptas and Zuma tried to do to me, trying to force me to help them steal money from the public coffers, they at an NEC meeting decided that they'll institute a commission of inquiry, and they invited all NEC members and government people to come and give in evidence. I had a meeting with Montashe, and I told him what had transpired in my case. But in that meeting, he told me that, in fact, quite a number of ministers and NEC members had come to him, and he was confident that, in fact, they will actually come and give evidence so that the NEC could finally do something about the Guptas and their state capture.
Right.
But to my surprise, that investigation went nowhere. I ended up being the only person who actually not just met him, but submitted an affidavit to say this is what transpired.
Right.
And part of the reason why these kinds of things happen is that there is an unwritten law or rule in organizations such as political parties that we don't tell on each other. Firstly, secondly, you defend your leader. And thirdly, because you are also implicated, you'd rather keep quiet, because if you speak, you'll also be exposed. And a then minister, but Tabile Dlamini was the president of the Women's League, actually put it very aptly to say, all of us have skeletons in our cupboards. If you speak, hell will break loose. And that was essentially the reason why they failed to speak out. And in the process, the party's reputation and image was damaged. But most importantly, our country went down in ways that will take almost a generation to put back on track. So many things have gone wrong. And the leadership of the ANC let us down in more ways than one, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, they defended the party, the president. I mean, there were many opportunities in the National Assembly when they could have supported motions of no confidence in Zuma, but, fearing to lose their positions in Parliament as MPs, they decided to take the hit from the political bosses and defended this man. So anyone who says Zuma was alone is misinformed. Zuma was never alone. He was defended by a robust party machinery to do everything that he enabled to be done to South Africa. But what was the role of Duduzane Zuma in all of this? I mean, what was he doing?
Duduzane Zuma was nothing but Zuma's son. And the Guptas were smart in the sense that they knew that to get into the hearts and pockets of all the ANC leaders was to get close to your families. Now, you would know that the former ANC Premier of the Free State, Ace Magashule, was subsequently elected as Secretary General of the ANC. His son became an employee of the Gupta family. The same applied to Duduzane Zuma. And in fact, the Guptas gave them accommodation in their compound. So they literally stayed there. So they knew that by taking care of the kids of these corrupt politicians, they will actually have greater influence and control over the party coffers. So Duduzane Zuma became Zuma's son, became one of the lieutenants of the Gupta family. So he'll be sent to go and talk to ministers, DGs, and emissaries to try and get deals so that the Guptas could actually make money and steal from the purse. And he became a so-called billionaire because the Guptas literally took care of him and made sure that, in fact, an impression is created that he was wealthy. And Zuma himself even went to parliament to say these Guptas brothers were his friends and they're looking after his family members, and he will defend it until the end of his days. So Duduzane Zuma became a pawn that the Guptas used, using his connections to his father.
But he is also an adult male. He's a male adult. He can make his own decision. He's very eloquent. He speaks well. He can't claim victimhood. I mean, he continues to live the high life in Dubai. That money. Yeah.
He can't claim to be a victim. I mean, I must. If you read my book, you'll see that I even talk in the early stages when this state capture thing was less known. I mean, I even tweeted once and defended his right to be a businessman. But, I was not aware that, in fact, he was simply being a pawn of the Gupta brothers. So he basically sold his soul to the Gupta family in return for the life of a billionaire that they gave him. The fact that he now has property in Dubai is largely not because of his business acumen, but it's simply because of his connections to the Gupta brothers, who made sure that they looked after him because they knew that they could use his name and his father's name to continue looting from the coffers of the South African taxpayer.
I think there's going to be consequences for this. I know, Themba, you keep saying history will judge some history. I don't know who history is and when history is going to strike, because it's just acting. But we appointed, the president appointed Shamila Batofi a few years ago. She's now going to reach the end of her term. She has nothing to show. What's going on? I mean, she keeps saying, and my specific question is about her or the NPA making an announcement that they're going to go after the Guptas to try and get them extradited to South Africa. But Duduzane Zuma was a key partner of the Gupta enterprise. He comes and goes all the time. Surely, why do they not arrest her? Or is it just the Guptas? Why are they leaving Zuma around? Are they afraid? Is the NPA so infested with Zuma supporters that nothing is going to happen? There will not be consequences for state capture.
I think the best way to understand this is by understanding the fact that during state capture, these guys started off as just greedy business people. They became sophisticated. They understood what it would take for them to become multi-billionaires using our taxes. So what they did was to identify key aspects of the state. Law enforcement became an important part of what they were trying to do. They made sure that the police were weakened, weak people were appointed. They made sure that the NPA was captured in the sense that they appointed very weak people who were part of their establishment. They made sure that the intelligence agencies were not just looted, but they also were used to cover up their tracks. They wanted to take charge of national treasury by appointing ministers who were part of the criminal establishment. And their next target, in my view, was going to be the Reserve Bank, because they knew that if they also controlled the Reserve Bank, they would have had access to the public purse. So that was part of the strategy. So they weakened the establishment, the state apparatus, which made it possible for them to steal as much as they could, and that they would end up not facing consequences of their actions. So Batoyi, I believe, has her heart in the right place. She just lacks capacity. She doesn't have the people to do the kind of investigations that need to be done to make sure that there is successful prosecution. Remember, these guys also have large funds. They can get the best possible lawyers. Now, if you get a weak case that goes to court, our courts are independent, and we could end up losing many of these cases that are instituted. So they're trying to do their best to build capacity, to employ the right kind of people so that when cases are taken to court, they are guaranteed a prosecution. Now, at this stage, my concern is that, in fact, they do not have capacity to implement or prosecute as many of the implicated people. But the Zondo Commission report is coming out now. The Zondo Commission did a lot of investigation, a lot of detective work and forensic work was actually done. So it is possible, in my view, and I'm hopeful that when that report comes out, the NPA may actually be in a better position to receive documents, files, and evidence that point to possible prosecutions, and that, in fact, the process could be expedited somehow in the next few years. But the worry is that, in fact, the state is not giving enough resources so that they can build the muscle to prosecute all those who are implicated in state capture. But I think that Batoyi has the heart in the right place. She just needs the capacity to do it.
But the state, when you say the state, you mean the ANC, because the state is controlled by the ANC, and many of the people who are implicated in all the wrongdoing that happened. Now, in the ANC, they were protected they continue to be protected by the African National Congress. So how does South Africa free itself from this logjam?
I'm pinning my hopes that, in fact, the President Ramaphosa is going to put enough resources into the NPA so that they do their prosecutions. I'm equally optimistic that we've got a very vibrant civil society organizations in the country who will make sure that if prosecutions are not done by the state, there will be private prosecutions because our law does allow that. I remain optimistic because we have a very vibrant media and press. If there is slowing down of prosecutions, our media will expose it. We also have a very strong and independent judiciary. If private prosecutions are brought up, I believe that, in fact, these people will indeed be prosecuted. But my hope is that President Ramaphosa will actually give Batoyi a blank check to say, go and find the skills, go and find the people to help you with prosecutions, and let's get the ball rolling. Because you're right. I mean, some of these crimes were committed more than a decade ago, and it's just taking too long to do the prosecutions. But
Deputy Justice Raymond Zondo himself did say, look, Batoyi or the NPA doesn't have to wait. There's already a lot of information that we have uncovered, that we have investigated, that we've made or prepared to make available to the NPA. So, I mean, waiting for the report, when the judge himself said, wait, you don't have to wait for the report, the information is there. I'm getting the feeling that we keep kicking the ball further down the road, and South Africans keep falling for the trap. Oh, no, just wait. No, there's sufficient information for Batoyi to act. She's not acting.
The issue is that for a case to be presented before a judge, it needs to be a prosecutable case. So it must be ready. Because, for example, I went to the Zondo Commission, I did an affidavit, presented it to the Zondo Commission and made my evidence there. But when we go to court, an affidavit must be redone to make sure that it meets the tests of being a criminal case in a court. So it's not going to be sufficient for a file to be presented simply from the Zondo Commission to a court. It needs to be, a file must be received as evidence, but that evidence must be translated into a formal charge. And you need very smart people to take the evidence from the Zondo Commission and turn them into a charge sheet that must be presented before a court case. But the issue of speed, I mean, there's no argument about that. I'm agreeing with you. I think that NPA needs to be capacitated, make sure that when those files are received, that translated or converted into charge sheets so that prosecutions can begin. Because the last thing, Solly, we need is for these people to be prosecuted in court, and the judge says, but this is not sufficient evidence, and those people go scot-free. And remember, if you're charged and you're discharged or recused by a court, chances are that you may never be charged again in the future. So Batoyi is correct in saying, I want to be confident that when I present a charge sheet before a judge, it is a charge sheet that will actually hold and somebody will be prosecuted.
But Themba, you're saying to me that the information coming directly from the Zondo Commission is not necessarily ready to be taken to a court of law. I understand that, but surely the judge already made it clear that they could access some of that information 2-3 years ago. They could have accessed. So they should be on some cases. They should have taken some of that information and taking it further down. So they should be at a point where they are ready to prosecute some people. They can't say, let's wait for the judge, for the Zonal Commission to present its report, because even the information coming from the report might not be ready to be taken to the court. You know what I'm saying? So they can't, it's safe to say we keep, wait for this one, wait for this one. No. When the report comes out, they will get information in there, some of which might need further investigation, maybe, in order to be presentable in front of a court. But that information is already available to them throughout. I think we shouldn't be making excuses for Batohi. Okay, sure, we can't blame her if she doesn't have the resources, if the NPA is infested with people who are planted in there by Zuma, who would deliberately making sure that nothing happens. But it's frustrating South Africans. Sometimes we must choose between looking at South Africa from the perspective of the ANC and looking at South Africa from the perspective of South Africa. And a lot of time we got caught up in making excuses for a president of the ANC, for the ANC processes, frustrations. No, South Africa can't always be waiting for the ANC. I'm sorry.
We have to understand. I mean, I'm equally impatient. I think that there are cases that, in my view, are clear-cut cases that I think should have been presented to court now. So I equally share your concerns. The point of the matter is that when I think part of Batoi's concern at this stage is that, does she have the capacity, does she have the people inside the NPA who can be able to stand up in court and say, here's a case, Minister so-and-so did the following, here's the evidence, let's go.
Yeah.
Remember that a lot of these suspected individuals have very deep pockets. They're going to get the best possible lawyers and advocates to represent them in court. But the state, does it have the capacity to actually withstand and act against some of these culprits if they do not have the very strong, powerful, experienced advocates within the NPA who can be able to do the prosecution? So that's the concern I have, and I suspect that is Batoi's dilemma at this particular point in time. But I remain optimistic that, in fact, she's getting close to it. I understand the impatience. I think she's getting close to it. We may say, because you don't need 100 people prosecuted. All South Africans want is to just find 10 or 15 individuals who are very crucial to the state capture project, get those people prosecuted and locked up, wearing orange overalls. And I think South Africans will see that there's progress. But unfortunately, if you understand that the damage was done in the NPA was done over a decade, it can't be fixed within 2 or 3 years. It takes a lot of time and work to get these things ready to be prosecuted.
Yeah, I agree with you. Themba, you mentioned earlier that the African National Congress, of course we all know that, is divided into two factions. Now, I know you also mentioned a few times, and I agree with you, that maybe if it were under President Ramaphosa, and he would make the resources available for the institutions to start doing what they delivering properly on their mandate as per the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. What would happen, God forbid, were President Ramaphosa to be incapacitated? Do you think that a President David Mabuza would act in the interest of South Africa?
Well, the Constitution is very clear. If Ramaphosa is incapacitated, David Mabuza becomes the next president. I think that we've not seen much of him as deputy president in the country. I remain optimistic that, in fact, if he were to become president tomorrow, he's going to have to do what the Constitution expects of him. I think
Zuma didn't. Zuma did not.
The country is impatient. It's looking for somebody who's going to become loyal to the Constitution and to the Republic. And if it becomes very clear that whoever takes over from Ramaphosa is doing what Zuma did during his 10 years in power, I think that South African citizens will rise. And I think the ANC already has received a message from the electorate that they are no longer guaranteed votes of even the poorest of the poor in this country. So if they do not act and allow a new leader, whoever it is, to govern this country properly, I think that the South African masses will rise, and we've got a vibrant media, we've got a vibrant civil society. I think that we're not going to wait for 10 years. We will see changes happening much sooner. And already in my head, I'm beginning to accept that, in fact, the best future for our country is to have coalition governments where you don't have one party being too dominant over every aspect of our life without any balances and checks. Because when one party is too dominant, parliament becomes weak, becomes useless, and it doesn't protect the constitution. And I think we'll get into trouble. So South African voters are already signaling to political parties that if you don't do what we expect you to do, you are not guaranteed your seat in government.
Yeah, we have about 7 minutes left. I want to ask this question. Given that the ANC is divided, Themba, do you think it's able to have a conversation, even in the safest of places, given that in whatever room they meet in, there will be disagreement? Are they able to look back and say, we really messed up? We should have put the interests of the country ahead of the interests of the party. We should let these people have. Are they able to say, damn, this is not the ANC that we wanted to be?
Unfortunately, I don't sit in those meetings, but where I'm sitting, I don't think those conversations are happening. And if they do, they're not happening enough. There's just too many people who know that they are implicated in the state capture project, and they want to use the party to defend themselves, to make sure that they don't face the full might of the law. We still have a generation of politicians who are very key in the ANC, who see the party as a vehicle to riches, as a way of making money. And then the third grouping that you could talk about are those people who are genuinely committed to defending the constitution of the country. So I think that the ruling party in its current form is at its weakest point. And chances are that, in fact, it might even require the party to split up, and to have one strand, one faction beginning to say, this is what we want to do to correct the mistakes of the past. But in this environment where there's an attempt to unite all these different interests, I think that the party is not going to be able to make the tough decisions that need to be made to get our country right. And therein lies my concern about the party's ability to solve South Africa's challenges as we face them today. So that's my view on that.
In my view, Themba, you still have the youth and the power, the knowledge, the experience. You're carrying the wounds to save South Africa again. What would it take to get you back into civil service?
Look, I mean, I've over the past decade, when I've been out of public service, I'd actually opened my mind to the possibility of going back to government. But it's very clear that, in fact, somebody like me who raises questions, who doesn't accept wrongdoing and anti-corruption, chances are that there's very little opportunity to be trusted to go back into public service. So somebody like me is beginning to think maybe my role is going to be in the civil society space, to begin to influence the minds of those who are working in the public service, to make sure that they focus their attention on serving the public and become loyal, not to a party, but become loyal to the Constitution. So that's where I see myself, which may include the possibility of joining the academia to teach public servants.
That's what
good public servants.
Okay, that's what I do. I teach here, but I don't teach in South Africa because it looks like I'm a persona non grata in my own country. But Themba, last question. I wanted to ask you. So South Africa needs to change. South Africa needs to grow. South Africa needs to heal from the past. Were you to be president for a month, what are the first things you would do?
I think the main focus will be to just make sure that you fix the economy. I think that our economy is in dire straits, so tough decisions need to be made. I think that the public service bill is too high. Public servants are not actually delivering as expected from the public, so that's one thing that needs to be sorted out. Secondly, I would make sure that we review the electoral system. I think that the electoral system rewards people on the basis of popularity and loyalty to their parties, and not so much on ability or skills or willingness to improve the lives of ordinary people. And I think I'd make sure that we do those kinds of things. Obviously, putting greater focus and attention on education and training of our people, fixing the education system. I think that's a key element. And then addressing the issue of energy and power, which is part of the economy, and fighting crime and corruption. I think I would make sure that enough resources are put into those areas to make sure that our country can be refocused into a successful nation again.
So that was not my last question. My last question is this one. It's almost multi-stronged. Themba, unlike you, there are many, many other blacklisted people out there. Many South Africans with awesome skills, qualifications, experience, who refused to do wrong, or who spoke out against wrong, or who simply walked away when they were asked to do wrong that they knew is not good for the country. They are quiet. They haven't written books. They are waiting, hopefully, for one day when the changes will happen, or when there are opportunities overseas to leave. Or, what do you say to those people? What do you say about the protection of whistleblowers or people who refuse to speak out or to act against the interests of the country? And are you still blacklisted in some level?
Well, I mean, if you speak out and are seen to be challenging corruption and exposing wrongdoing in government, chances are that you will not get appointed into any key position in this government. So I think that what needs to be sent out as a clear message coming from the president of the country is that whistleblowing is everybody's civic duty. They need to be protected and provided financial support, and make it a norm for each and every South African in both the public and private sectors to say we will want to be ethical in everything that we do. We must act with integrity in every aspect of our lives. And if you speak out, you will be protected. And that message is not coming strong enough from the head of state. And I think President Ramaphosa needs to speak out and make sure that he not only protects whistleblowers, but encourages everybody to act with integrity and expose wrongdoing wherever they find it. And I think that when that happens, more and more South Africans will feel confident to speak out. And I think that we'll be on the right track to a better future.
Are you still blacklisted in some contests?
Well, at this stage, all my attempts to get a job in both the public and private sectors have failed in about 11 years. So that's why I'm exploring the possibility of getting into civil society or joining a university, because as far as both public and I emphasize private sectors, you as a whistleblower, you're still seen as a persona non grata, a political risk, and very few people want to be seen to be associating with you. And that's a very sad part of our recent history as a country.
Yeah. Themba Maseko, thank you. I never say to people, my leader, but you're an awesome leader. I never say that to anybody, okay? But I really admire you. I admire you, not just for you, but for South Africa. I think we need more of you in the country. And I would like you to not give up, because so much still needs to be done. It cannot be done without the participation, the leadership of people like yourself. And I thank you for giving us this hour of your time to have this discussion.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Soli. Thank you.
Okay. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here. It's winter. It's cold. It's snow all over the place. I want to come home.
We have great weather here. Lots of rain, but it's great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Themba. Bye.
Yes. Bye.